In 1945, the world changed forever. One man stood in the desert, watching the sky burn with the light of his own creation. And when he saw it, he whispered,
"Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
But what he really became was broken. This is not just the story of a scientist, it's the story of a man who changed humanity and couldn't live with it. Robert Oppenheimer was born on April 22, 1904, in New York City, where he was given the name Julius Robert Oppenheimer. He quickly became known mostly by his middle name, and is often called Robert Oppenheimer or J. Robert Oppenheimer today. Robert came from a wealthy Jewish family in New York City. His father, Julius, was born in Hesse-Nassau, a region in Prussia which became part of the United German Empire just months before he was born, in May 1871. During a time when anti-Semitism was growing in Western and Central Europe, Julius Oppenheimer left Germany in 1888 at the age of 17 and traveled to the United States. Although he arrived with very little money, he did well in America, and by the time Robert was born in 1904, he had become a successful executive at a top textile company in Manhattan. Robert's mother was Ella Friedman, also of Jewish descent, who was born in New York in 1870 to a family of German Jews that immigrated to America a generation before Julius Oppenheimer. She was an artist, and Robert adopted some of her views on life and the universe. Ella and Julius had one other child, a son named Frank, who was born in 1912, 8 years after Robert. Robert went to the Ethical Culture School and then to the Alcuin Preparatory School, which were two of the best schools in New York during the early 1900s. By age 5, he already showed an interest in mineralogy, a passion he got from his German grandfather. His talent was so evident that at the age of 11, he became a member of the Mineralogical Club of New York City. His early abilities continued through high school, and he completed his time at Alcuin in a year and a half, which was shorter than usual, as he completed 2 grades in 12 months and advanced quickly through the 8th grade. By then, his interests had shifted from mineralogy to the more rigorous sciences, especially chemistry, although it would be physics that he would embrace in the future. In 1922, Oppenheimer started his studies at Harvard University when he was just 18. While at America's oldest university, he was greatly impacted by Professor Percy Bridgman's lessons, an experimental physicist who taught there at the time. This was also a time when students at Harvard and other top universities in America were required to study many subjects, and Oppenheimer immersed himself in history as well as Greek and Latin classics, which were still important in many Western education programs in the 1920s. Later in life, Oppenheimer reflected on his time at Harvard, saying he spent most of it in the library and read a lot. He even attended more classes than he needed to. As a result, in 1925, Oppenheimer graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree, earning the highest honors. Just 3 years at Harvard is a mark of achievement that usually required 4 years to reach. But Oppenheimer, following a growing trend, finished in less time than expected. Before he even graduated from Harvard, Oppenheimer had already been accepted to further his education at Cambridge University in England. This was the main place for studying physics in Britain at that time, a reputation it has been maintained since the days of Isaac Newton in the late 17th century. The year Oppenheimer spent at Cambridge, from the fall of 1925 to the summer of 1926, played a key role in his growth as he learned from the Lord Ernest Rutherford, a physicist from New Zealand who is often seen as the father of nuclear physics today. For example, Rutherford was the first to find out and explain what nuclear half-life is and the radiation linked to it, an accomplishment that earned him a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1908. After getting into Cambridge, Oppenheimer wrote to Ernest Rutherford asking if he could work at the Cavendish Laboratory. However, a letter of recommendation from Bridgman hinted that Oppenheimer's awkwardness in the lab suggested that he should focus on theoretical physics instead of experimental physics. Rutherford was not impressed, but Oppenheimer went to Cambridge anyway. J.J. Thomson finally accepted him with the condition that he finish a basic lab course. Oppenheimer felt very unhappy at Cambridge and wrote to a friend, "I'm having a really rough time. The lab work is really dull, and I am so bad at it that I can't feel like I'm learning anything." He also had a strained relationship with his tutor, Patrick Blackett, who would later win a Nobel Prize. Oppenheimer's friend, Francis Ferguson, claimed that Oppenheimer once admitted to leaving a poisoned apple on Blackett's desk, and Oppenheimer's parents persuaded the university not to kick him out. There are no records of any poisoning incident or probation, but Oppenheimer regularly met with a psychiatrist. Oppenheimer was a tall, thin chain smoker who often forgot to eat when he was very focused. Many friends said he could be harmful to himself. Toward the end of his first year at Cambridge, Oppenheimer, whose skills were starting to gain significant recognition among European physicists, accepted an offer from the theoretical physicist Max Born, studied under him at the University of Göttingen in Germany, one of Europe's prominent centers of learning. There, Oppenheimer learned with several peers who would become major figures in the field of theoretical physics in the 20th century, including Werner Heisenberg, Enrico Fermi, and Edward Teller, several of whom Oppenheimer would later collaborate with. During the Manhattan Project, in the middle of the Second World War, Oppenheimer earned his Doctor of Philosophy degree in March 1927, when he was just 23 years old, with Born as his supervisor. During his time in Europe, Oppenheimer wrote over a dozen papers, making significant contributions to the emerging area of quantum mechanics. Together with Born, he published a well-known paper concerning the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. This approximation distinguishes between nuclear and electronic movements in the math used to study molecules, which helps simplify calculations by allowing nuclear movement to be ignored. It is still his most frequently referenced work. This approximation came about largely because of Oppenheimer's strong interests in both chemistry and physics. The theory they put forward included concepts from quantum chemistry and molecular physics. Practically speaking, the approximation was crucial for scientists beginning in the late 1920s, as it enabled them to differentiate between the movements of nuclei and electrons. The individual who collaborated with Max Born and earned his PhD in Göttingen was a rather intriguing person. Oppenheimer had a blend of being a distant scientist and a fairly cheerful person, sometimes shifting from being shy to outgoing, depending on his mood or the situation. A chain smoker, he was constantly enveloped in smoke throughout his adult life, a habit that would significantly contribute to his early death in his 60s. As time passed, he developed a bit of arrogance, but balanced this with intellectual kindness towards his peers and students in later years. One notable feature of his character was his fascination with Eastern philosophy and mysticism, particularly his interest in Hinduism and Confucianism. He even took the step of learning Sanskrit, which is the holy language of Hinduism, to read the ancient religious texts in their original form. His interest in spirituality and mysticism was not just a quirky hobby. For Oppenheimer, studying physics served as a way to delve into the mysterious aspects of the universe and existence. His broader intellectual curiosity was more about exploration than simply gathering hard scientific evidence. However, there was also an unpredictable and inconsistent side to Oppenheimer. He often felt like an outsider, and is known to have experienced episodes of depression. In essence, he was a bit of a mystery. After he finished his education at Göttingen and published several more papers based on research he conducted in England and Germany, Oppenheimer came back to the United States. After briefly working at Harvard and Caltech, returned to Europe for a few months to work at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands and in Zurich, Switzerland. It wasn't until 1929 that Oppenheimer decided to stay in America for good. He accepted 2 positions and took on the role of Associate Professor of Physics at both the University of California at Berkeley and Caltech. For the following 13 years, from 1929 to 1942, he worked at both schools, teaching in the fall and winter at Berkeley, and then giving lectures in the spring at Caltech in Pasadena. In the 1930s, Oppenheimer gained recognition in the American physics community for his teaching style, and many of the most skilled physicists in the mid-20th century trained under him at Berkeley and Caltech within the School of Theoretical Physics that he established. Typically, there was a group of about a dozen advanced graduate students and research fellows who collaborated closely with Oppenheimer on significant questions in theoretical physics at that time. His students and colleagues found him captivating. He had a magnetic presence in private, but often seemed distant in public. People had mixed views about him. Some admired him as a brilliant yet detached genius, while others saw him as pretentious and insecure. His students mostly viewed him in a favorable light, mimicking his walk, way of speaking, and even his habit of reading texts in their original languages. He was capable of identifying the key problems based on the topics he chose to cover. He was deeply engaged with these issues, persistently seeking solutions and sharing his passion with the group. At its peak, his group included about 8 to 10 graduate students and 6 postdoctoral fellows. He met with them each day in his office, discussing each student's research progress. He had a broad range of interests, and in one afternoon, they could touch on topics like quantum electrodynamics, cosmic rays, electron pair production, and nuclear physics. Oppenheimer conducted significant research in theoretical astronomy, focusing mainly on general relativity and nuclear theory, as well as in nuclear physics, spectroscopy, and quantum field theory, which includes its extension into quantum electrodynamics. He also found the complicated math of relativistic quantum mechanics interesting, but he was skeptical about its accuracy. His research anticipated many discoveries that followed, such as the neutron, meson, and neutron star. At first, he was mainly interested in the theory of continuous spectrum. His first published article, released in 1926, dealt with the quantum theory of molecular band spectra. He created a method to calculate transition probabilities for it. He worked on the photoelectric effect for hydrogen and X-rays, and figured out the absorption coefficient at the K-edge. His calculations matched the observations related to the sun's X-ray absorption, but not with helium. Later on, it became clear that the sun is mostly hydrogen, confirming that his calculations were right. Oppenheimer made significant contributions to understanding cosmic ray showers. He also investigated field electron emission, which helped develop the idea of quantum tunneling. In 1931, he co-authored a paper titled Relativistic Theory of the Photoelectric Effect with his student Harvey Hall. In this paper, based on experimental data, he accurately argued against Paul Dirac's claim that 2 energy levels of the hydrogen atom had the same energy. Later, one of his doctoral students, Willis Lamb, found out that this was due to what is now referred to as the Lamb shift, which earned Lamb a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1955. With Melba Phillips, who was the first graduate student to start her PhD under Oppenheimer's guidance, he calculated artificial radioactivity when nuclei were bombarded by deuterons. When Ernest Lawrence and Edwin McMillan bombarded nuclei, their results closely matched what George Gamow predicted, but higher energies and heavier nuclei did not fit the predictions. In 1935, Oppenheimer and Phillips developed a theory, now known as the Oppenheimer-Phillips process, to explain these findings. This theory is still relevant today. As early as 1930, Oppenheimer wrote a paper that essentially predicted the positron's existence. This was after Dirac suggested that electrons could have positive charge and negative energy. Dirac's work introduced what is now called the Dirac equation, which brought together quantum mechanics, special relativity, and the new idea of electron spin to explain the Zeeman effect. Citing experimental evidence, Oppenheimer dismissed the notion that the predicted positively charged electrons were protons, arguing that they would need to have the same mass as an electron, while experiments showed that protons were significantly heavier. 2 years later, Carl David Anderson found the positron, earning the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1936. These and many other discoveries made by Oppenheimer and his students at Berkeley and Caltech helped establish California as one of the leading centers for theoretical physics in the mid-20th century. He was diagnosed with a mild form of tuberculosis in the late 1920s. Because of this illness, he went to the dry air of Arizona and New Mexico in the following years and eventually purchased a ranch in New Mexico. In the middle of the 1930s, he started a romantic relationship with Jean Tatlock, a student studying psychiatry. She was the daughter of John Strong Tatlock, a well-known expert in Old English and a specialist on Geoffrey Chaucer's life and work. John was 10 years younger than Robert and struggled with serious depression and confusion about her sexuality. Their relationship was intense and continued until 1940, even after Oppenheimer began dating Kitty Harrison. Kitty was a botanist and physicist at Caltech, who divorced her second husband, Stuart Harrison, in November 1940 and married Robert the next day. It is still uncertain if Oppenheimer occasionally met with Tatlock in early 1944, before she tragically ended her life in January 1944. Robert and Kitty later had 2 children, a son named Peter, who was born in May 1941, as Kitty was already pregnant when they got married. They also had a daughter named Catherine after her mother, who was born in 1944. Oppenheimer's life, like that of nearly everyone across Europe, North Africa, North America, and much of Asia, was dramatically affected by the start of the Second World War in the fall of 1939. During the 1920s, Oppenheimer was not aware of what was happening in the world. He said he did not read newspapers or popular magazines and only found out about the Wall Street crash of 1929 while walking with Ernest Lawrence 6 months later. He mentioned that he had never voted until the presidential election in 1936. From 1934 onward, he started to care more about politics and global issues. The war began mainly due to the rise of the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, who took power in Germany in early 1933. The Nazis were a fanatically anti-Semitic nationalist and fascist group determined to eliminate the Jewish population in Germany and to start a new war in Europe to change the rules of the Treaty of Versailles, which had ended the First World War. They aimed to create a new German empire, the Third Reich, that would control the continent. The Nazis' harsh treatment of Jewish people became much more severe, starting in 1936, and especially in 1938, when Germany began taking over nearby countries, first Austria, then Czechoslovakia. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. However, people in the United States were not fully supportive of getting involved in what they saw as a European conflict. As a result, the U.S. officially stayed neutral for the first 2 years of the war, even though President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's government was already supplying weapons and resources to Britain since the war began. Oppenheimer's life and historical significance would drastically change because of the events in December 1941. At that point, the United States was still neutral in World War II, even though Europe faced a dire situation, with the Nazis taking over Poland in the fall of 1939, Denmark and Norway in the spring of the next year, and later the Low Countries and France during the summer of 1940. Many other countries, such as Italy, Hungary, and Romania, were allied with the Nazis, and there were ongoing invasions of British colonies in North Africa and Russia starting from the summer of 1941. It seemed likely that Germany would control Europe. Amidst this situation, Japan, a nation with extreme nationalism looking to build an Asian and Pacific empire, which already included Korea, Manchuria, and a large part of eastern China by the early 1940s, chose to attack the United States without first declaring war. The assault on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and other American territories like the Philippines on December 7, 1941, pulled the United States into World War II. Soon after, the U.S. found itself at war with Germany, Italy, and other nations in the Axis alliance. The entire Northern Hemisphere ended up in conflict. Oppenheimer quickly rose to a key position in America's research initiatives during the war. This was in relation to Germany's efforts to develop a weapon of mass destruction to win the war quickly. In the 1920s and 1930s, Germany was home to many top scientists, so they were well equipped to create a nuclear weapon. For example, nuclear fission was discovered by a team which included Otto Robert Frisch and Lisa Meitner in Berlin in 1938. In the following year, the Nazis began various experiments to use this discovery to create a nuclear weapon. Some studies focused on building a nuclear reactor, while others looked at using heavy water for an atomic bomb, with research being conducted in Nazi-controlled Norway throughout the war. Back in August 1939, President Roosevelt in Washington, D.C., received a letter from Hungarian nuclear physicist Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein, warning the U.S. government about the dangers of these Nazi experiments. However, not much was done to respond to this alert. When the United States entered the war at the end of 1941, renewed focus was placed on America starting its own studies in this field. Oppenheimer was to technically lead the Los Alamos laboratory during the World War II, but this was all part of the Manhattan Project, a research program started by the U.S. government in 1942, with the main goal of creating a nuclear bomb. The name comes from the fact that the team responsible for the larger project first met in 1942 on Manhattan Island in New York City. Eventually, starting in 1942, the project grew to employ around 130,000 people nationwide. They worked on different aspects of the project in various states and locations. For example, a large group in Chicago throughout the war included Oppenheimer's former colleague from Göttingen, Enrico Fermi, and Leo Szilard, who had written a letter to Roosevelt in 1939, warning him about the Nazi nuclear project. This team created the first working nuclear reactor. Another group at the Hanford site in Washington was tasked with making plutonium from uranium as a raw material for future nuclear weapons, and a similar project was happening in Tennessee. There were also teams in Europe working under the Manhattan Project banner who were engaging in spying to find out what the Nazis were developing. Oppenheimer was responsible for the most crucial research team within the Manhattan Project as the director of the Los Alamos laboratory in New Mexico. He was almost not chosen for this role. The leader of the Manhattan Project was Major General Leslie Groves. Groves might not be a widely recognized name today, but he is notable for leading both the Manhattan Project, which created the first nuclear bomb, and for overseeing the building of the Pentagon, the headquarters for the U.S. military and Department of Defense. In 1942, Oppenheimer was recommended to Groves as a potential leader for a group of theoretical physicists and scientists for the Manhattan Project, but Groves was initially unsure, preferring someone who had won a Nobel Prize in physics and, therefore, would have the necessary reputation to lead some of the top minds of that time. However, he was eventually convinced that Oppenheimer had a proven ability to bring out the best in his colleagues. Groves contacted Oppenheimer, and after meeting with him, he decided that Oppenheimer was a good fit for the position. In the following weeks in early winter of 1942, Oppenheimer looked for a suitable place to set up a research center, ideally a secluded location far from any cities to maintain confidentiality. He finally chose Los Alamos in New Mexico as the location, where a research center was built on the grounds of a former school. This was assigned to the University of California by the War Department, allowing Oppenheimer a certain level of freedom in hiring and dismissing staff, while he served as the head of the Los Alamos laboratory. Although there would be more hiring than layoffs, at its peak, there were more than 5,000 workers at Los Alamos, which was a lot more than Oppenheimer expected at first. The group that Oppenheimer put together at Los Alamos included some of the best scientists of the early 1900s. One of them was John Hasbrouck Van Vleck, a physicist and mathematician who was at Harvard when Oppenheimer got there in 1922. He later won a Nobel Prize in 1977 for his research on electronic magnetism. Van Vleck significantly helped with the design of the gun used in the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. A fellow researcher of Oppenheimer's from Berkeley, Robert Serber, helped organize the physics work at Los Alamos, and eventually named the bombs used in the first test explosion and against Japan as the Thin Man, Little Boy, and Fat Man. Hans Bethe, a physicist from Germany, later won a Nobel Prize in 1967. He played a key role in figuring out the critical mass needed for the bombs made at Los Alamos. Lastly, Edward Teller was a Hungarian-born scientist who was brought to the Los Alamos laboratory. He studied in Germany around the same time as Oppenheimer, in the late 1920s, but later moved to the United States. Teller had already worked at Fermi's reactor center in Chicago before moving to New Mexico. Teller was likely Oppenheimer's closest partner at Los Alamos. Additionally, there were hundreds of other engineers, metallurgists, chemists, and military specialists working in research teams at Los Alamos, focusing on many detailed aspects of how to build the first atomic bomb. The challenge faced by this team of physicists, engineers, and scientists was huge. When they came together at Los Alamos, they had very little to go on except their theoretical understanding of how a nuclear chain reaction could happen. However, it is important to realize that Oppenheimer and his team were not only trying to create a nuclear weapon, but also to anticipate what would occur when one detonated. Therefore, there was a tremendous amount of testing and theoretical thinking throughout 1943 and 1944. During all of this, Oppenheimer worked tirelessly. As Hans Bethe recalled years later, his incredible speed in understanding the main ideas of any topic was crucial. He could quickly learn the important details of every aspect of the job. He didn't just manage from an office, he was both mentally and physically involved at each critical moment. Throughout 1943, the research at Los Alamos began to concentrate on a prototype called Thin Man. This was a plutonium gun-type weapon, which would function more like a cannon to cause an explosion, instead of being a bomb that collapses in on itself. The process of creating this was very complicated from a planning point of view, with the polonium used in the trigger needing to be sourced from minerals in Ontario, Canada, and then processed at a different facility in Tennessee, which was also part of the larger Manhattan Project, or at the Hanford location in Washington state. Yet, the design challenge was even trickier. For the cannon-style weapon to function, a plutonium projectile had to be shot out. Inside, it needed to be sped up to 3,000 feet per second, or more than 3,200 kilometers per hour. Otherwise, the nuclear reaction would start before everything else in the bomb was set for a successful blast. This was ultimately the downfall of the Thin Man concept, as it was found out during the process that the barrel needed to reach this speed would be way too big to be used in a bomb that could be carried on a B-29 flying superfortress, the newly designed heavy bombers that were supposed to deliver any nuclear weapon created by the US government. Because of this, and the problems associated with using plutonium in a cannon-type bomb, the Thin Man idea was dropped in April 1944. After the Thin Man design was set aside, Oppenheimer reassigned many of the scientists and engineers who had been focused on it to work on a different design called Little Boy. This was a simpler cannon-type nuclear bomb, but unlike the Thin Man, it was planned to use uranium-235 instead of plutonium for the nuclear reaction that would trigger the explosion. At the same time, a third type of design was being developed. The Fat Man, as it was called, would utilize plutonium, but it was intended as a bomb that implodes. The team working on it was led by an American physicist named Seth Nettermeyer. Oppenheimer still preferred the cannon-type design, even while the Fat Man was being worked on during 1943 and 1944. Oppenheimer's talent as a leader at Los Alamos was evident when he made the important choice to invite John von Neumann, a mathematician and physicist from Hungary, to the team in 1943 to examine the bomb's design. Von Neumann was the one who proposed a round shape and specific charges, reducing the amount of plutonium needed and making the creation of an implosion-style bomb more workable and realistic. In the following months, the metallurgists at Los Alamos worked on figuring out how to mold plutonium into a sphere. Eventually, they found a solution by creating a plutonium-gallium alloy, which could be pressed into spherical shapes and covered with nickel. The design stage was almost finished. As 1945 began, Oppenheimer's teams were close to finalizing the designs for the Little Boy and Fat Man bombs. Thus, there were two strong options for a successfully made nuclear weapon. Ultimately, both would be ready around the same time, as design issues were resolved in the spring of 1945 and the necessary amounts of enriched uranium and plutonium were produced at sites in Washington state and Tennessee. These were major tasks considering the technology available for the Manhattan Project, as enriching these materials to make them usable in the mid-1940s was very expensive and time-intensive. Other challenges that needed to be tackled were mostly engineering issues. For example, in 1944, the Fat Man bomb was put together using about 1,500 bolts, which was an unrealistic number for a functioning bomb. By the time it was completed in early summer 1945, Oppenheimer's team had managed to cut this down to just 90 bolts. Other technical challenges related to how the bomb would drop from a height. Throughout 1944 and 1945, tests were conducted to evaluate how a bomb like the Fat Man and Little Boy would fall through the air. All of this came together during spring 1945, and by the middle of summer, Oppenheimer was able to inform Major General Leslie Groves, the leader of the Manhattan Project, that they were prepared to carry out a test explosion. The Trinity nuclear test took place in the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico on July 16, 1945. The bomb used for the test was an implosion-type Fat Man bomb that contained plutonium. It was nicknamed the Gadget. To ensure the test was conducted safely, they chose a location that was very remote, nearly unpopulated, and isolated from other areas. The test was something that required a lot of careful planning, as producing the plutonium needed was extremely expensive, costing billions of dollars today, due to the complicated ways used to enrich uranium and plutonium back then. The success of this test was very important. As Groves mentioned, he did not want to have to face Congress and explain why he had wasted $1 billion worth of plutonium by blowing it up in the desert without a good reason. The Trinity test took place early in the morning on July 16th. Observation shelters were set up in 3 locations to the north, south, and west of the explosion site, each about 9 kilometers from where the bomb was to be detonated. Goggles were provided to guard against dangerous ultraviolet rays, and the distance was deemed safe regarding the radioactive material that would be released. Many observers that morning were scientists, including Oppenheimer, Teller, Bethe, Enrico Fermi, and John von Neumann. Some thought the bomb might not work at all. Others worried about how much damage it could cause. They got their answers at 5:29 a.m. when the device exploded, releasing energy equal to 25,000 tons of TNT. This explosion formed a crater that was 1/3 of a kilometer wide and melted the sand at the launch site, turning it into a light green glassy rock. The observers, located 9 kilometers away, did not hear the tremendous noise from the shockwave until 40 seconds after the explosion, but during that time, they saw a growing fireball that changed colors from purple to green to orange and finally white. Then it formed a mushroom cloud that eventually rose 12 kilometers into the sky. The shock from the blast was felt almost 100 kilometers away, while those in the observation shelters 9 kilometers from the explosion later described a moment of intense heat, like standing in front of a hot oven for a few seconds when the bomb went off. Oppenheimer's supposed words while watching the Trinity test explosion have become quite famous today. "I have become death, the destroyer of worlds." However, what should have been a serious moment turned into one of joy in the observation shelter as everyone celebrated the success of the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer was later described as very happy. Yet, the consequences of their achievement would soon become painfully obvious. By then, fighting in Europe had finished as the Allies entered Germany from the east and west in the spring of 1945. This led to Hitler taking his own life in Berlin in late April, followed by the Nazis surrendering a little over a week later. However, Japan showed no signs of wanting to surrender, and their military culture and honor strongly indicated that invading the Japanese islands would be necessary to end the war in the Pacific. The US government estimated that this could lead to millions of people dying, since the Japanese would fight fiercely until the end. So, a decision was made swiftly to use the new atomic bomb to show the Japanese government the powerful weapon available, now under President Harry Truman, who had taken over after President Roosevelt passed away in mid-April 1945. As a result, the Japanese city of Hiroshima was bombed with one of the little boy bombs on August 6, 1945. That evening in Los Alamos, Oppenheimer felt triumphant, but also wished the bomb could have been used against the Nazis in Germany. However, this feeling quickly changed to disappointment 3 days later when the US dropped a second bomb, named Fat Man, on the city of Nagasaki in Japan. Oppenheimer and his team thought this was unacceptable. They believed the Japanese had not been given enough time to understand the first bomb's impact before they decided to surrender, which they did 6 days after the Nagasaki bombing. This marked the end of the war. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the only 2 times in history that nuclear weapons have been used in war. Because of this, they are extremely controversial. Today, most experts looking back at the events of August 1945 tend to agree with Oppenheimer and his colleagues. They feel the first bomb dropped on Hiroshima was somewhat justifiable, even though it was regrettable. It was seen as a way to force Japan to surrender and possibly save millions of lives by avoiding a ground invasion of Japan. However, there is a general agreement that the bombing of Nagasaki just 3 days later was not necessary. More broadly, the moral questions surrounding the work done by Oppenheimer and his colleagues remain significant. The events of the war have raised questions. There are 2 perspectives on this issue. On one side, the creation of nuclear weapons poses a danger to humanity's survival today. However, the other side claims that the threat of nuclear weapons has helped prevent the world's powerful nations and large countries from entering major conflicts since 1945. For many years, countries in Europe have constantly fought against each other. This changed when it became clear that a direct fight could lead to destruction for both sides. Ironically, while nuclear weapons have led to a type of nuclear peace, the dangers are still significant in a world where political tensions are becoming more hostile and unstable in the 21st century. After the war ended, Oppenheimer's status soared within American academic communities. This opened up new doors for him, and he chose to leave Berkeley to move to the East Coast, where he took on the role of director at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton in New Jersey in 1947. This respected center focused on physics in the US and included notable scientists like Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, and Paul Dirac as founders or visiting scholars. Under Oppenheimer's guidance, it grew into a place for upcoming physicists, and several of his best graduate students from Berkeley also went to Princeton to study. In New Jersey, he continued using the methods he had developed in California during the 1930s, creating an atmosphere of lively discussions and research, often neglecting his own studies. Oppenheimer chose not to write or publish much during his time at Princeton. As a result, the institute became the top center for physics research in the US by the late 1940s and early 1950s. Besides his work at Princeton, Oppenheimer also held various government roles throughout the late 1940s and into the 1950s. He had security clearance to access classified documents relating to the US's changing nuclear program. A key aspect of this was his role in the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission, established in 1947 as a group led by the United Nations, which was created to promote global peace after the war. The Energy Commission was responsible for overseeing the spread of nuclear materials and the development of nuclear weapons. Although the United States was the only country with nuclear bombs for several years after 1945, it was just a matter of time before other nations started to create or attempt to develop their own bombs, now that everyone knew it was possible. Oppenheimer and some of his previous co-workers from the Manhattan Project were key players in the attempts to set up rules against the spread of nuclear weapons in 1946 and 1947, rules that still exist today. As the first leader of the commission, Oppenheimer aimed to prevent a nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union. However, in the backdrop of the growing Cold War, these efforts were unsuccessful, and a significant arms race began after the Soviets successfully tested their first nuclear weapon in 1949. When the US found out in 1949 that the Soviets had acquired a nuclear weapon, a discussion started within President Harry Truman's government about creating a hydrogen bomb, which was much stronger than the atomic bombs developed during the Manhattan Project and used against Japan in 1945. Oppenheimer and many other scientists from the Los Alamos laboratory who worked between 1942 and 1945 were against this idea. They argued that such a weapon could not be used effectively in a war without causing massive destruction and potentially starting a nuclear war that could endanger most life on Earth. In a letter to the government in late 1949, they mentioned that the extreme danger to humanity linked to the plan to create thermonuclear weapons far outweighs any military benefit. Despite their concerns, Truman moved forward and approved the new program in January 1950. Almost 3 years later, in November 1952, the first hydrogen bomb was tested on an island in the Pacific Ocean. The bomb, called Ivy Mike, caused an explosion that was equal to over 10 million tons of TNT and was 450 times stronger than the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. Even with the worries expressed by Oppenheimer and many others, the Cold War entered a phase known as mutually assured destruction. Though Oppenheimer played a crucial role in the Manhattan Project and served as a high-level government scientist for many years, he fell out of favor with the government in the early 1950s during the Second Red Scare. During this time, the Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union increased after Germany was split into a Western-aligned West Germany and a communist East Germany. The formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the Warsaw Pact as conflicting military groups, along with the Korean War, marked the first major fight between the Western and communist countries. In this atmosphere, the U.S. was initially worried about communist groups within the country, acting as supporters of the Soviet Union. However, these legitimate concerns quickly turned into exaggerated and baseless fears about anyone involved with socialist ideas or groups, like the American Civil Liberties Union. The Second Red Scare is named to differentiate it from the First Red Scare that hit America in the late 1910s, after the Russian Revolution in 1917. This period picked up speed in the late 1940s and reached its peak between 1950 and 1954. During this time, Senator Joseph McCarthy made significant efforts to find and prosecute anyone even slightly suspected of being a communist supporter. Oppenheimer soon became a target during the Second Red Scare. His connections with socialist ideologies and left-leaning groups in the U.S. date back to the mid-1930s. After spending his youth largely uninterested in politics, he began to care about political matters around this time. He joined various leftist and progressive groups when socialist organizations were seen as the main opposition to the rising fascism in Europe, especially after 1936, when the Soviet Union backed the Republicans against the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War. It is important to point out that Oppenheimer never actually joined the Communist Party in the United States. However, many people close to him, like John Tatlock, with whom he had a romantic relationship starting in 1936, his wife Kitty and his brother Frank were involved in the party. Other groups Robert participated in, like the American Civil Liberties Union, were viewed as radical during the 1930s and 1950s, but are now seen as important for the civil rights movement, which helped end segregation after nearly 100 years. Because of all this, Oppenheimer was viewed with suspicion by the authorities, a situation worsened by his father's German roots when the U.S. entered World War II. This was ironic, since Oppenheimer's Jewish heritage would have made him unwelcome under Nazi rule in Germany. However, many suspicions existed about him. During World War II, despite being a top figure in the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer was under surveillance, and the FBI had an ongoing file on him. By 1949, these issues came together, and that year, Oppenheimer had to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee regarding his political connections. During this testimony, he acknowledged his links to the Communist Party, mentioning that several of his notable students at Berkeley in the 1930s were also official members. Still, he emphasized that he had never been a member himself. Initially, not much came from the questioning, but 4 years later, in early 1953, the accusations against Oppenheimer resurfaced. This time, the FBI mistakenly believed he was a Soviet agent operating in America. Such was the level of fear and suspicion that prevailed in America during the Second Red Scare. In mid-December 1953, Oppenheimer lost his security clearance with the U.S. government. He was told he should resign from his government roles. Oppenheimer refused to step down and insisted on a hearing, which took place privately in late spring of 1954. During this hearing, Oppenheimer was severely undermined by his former associate, Edward Teller, who claimed that he had noticed Oppenheimer acting suspiciously while he was in charge of the Los Alamos laboratory. This act of betrayal led to Oppenheimer losing his security clearance and being pushed into a sort of political and social isolation in the mid-1950s. The time after his security hearing and the loss of his clearance was challenging for Oppenheimer. Reactions from the academic world were varied. Most of his peers defended him, but many bureaucrats and administrators at American universities were less supportive, resulting in several canceled lectures and appearances that Oppenheimer was supposed to give. Oppenheimer's self-assurance took a hit, and he avoided actively participating in many projects led by figures like Einstein, who warned the government and society about the risks of too much nuclear growth. Instead, he spent more time away from the mainland United States, moving to the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean, which is a U.S. territory. There, he bought a property on what was then called Gibney Beach on St. John Island, now commonly known as Oppenheimer Beach. From 1957 onward, he spent a lot of time there, even though many institutions in America still invited him to give guest lectures. However, the 1950s were a particularly unproductive time for him in research, during which he hardly published anything. By the late 1950s, there were serious efforts to restore Oppenheimer's reputation internationally. For example, in 1957, the French government honored him with the Légion d'honneur for his contributions during the war for the Allies. In 1962, he became a foreign member of the Royal Society in Britain. By that time, many in America began to realize that the Second Red Scare had been excessively harsh against people who had only minor connections with the American communist movement and had no real ties to the Soviet Union. Therefore, in 1963, President John F. Kennedy attempted to restore Oppenheimer's reputation by granting him the Enrico Fermi Award, which had been established in 1956 by the U.S. Department of Energy and named after Enrico Fermi, the Italian-American scientist who created the world's first nuclear reactor in Chicago in 1942 during the early stages of the Manhattan Project, before his death from stomach cancer in 1954. This award had been given to several people who had been involved at the Los Alamos laboratory under Oppenheimer from 1943 to 1945, including von Neumann, Bethe, and Teller in 1956, 1961, and 1962, respectively. Thus, Oppenheimer receiving the award in 1963, while late, was a positive recognition of the government's error in targeting him during the Red Scare. Oppenheimer did not get to enjoy his restored reputation. 2 years after he got the Fermi Award, he was diagnosed with throat cancer in late 1965, which was likely caused by his long habit of smoking. At that time, many types of cancer that can be treated today were almost always fatal. Therefore, although Oppenheimer went through intense chemotherapy to extend his life, he fell into a coma in early 1967 and passed away at home in Princeton on February 18th. He was 62 years old. While his reputation had been somewhat improved by the granting of the Enrico Fermi Award in 1963, many political figures still looked at him with suspicion. However, the academic community showed its respect for Oppenheimer at his funeral, which was attended by over 600 colleagues from academia, science, and the military, many of whom had collaborated with him at Los Alamos. His ashes were later scattered in the sea near St. John's Island in the Caribbean in an urn. Over the years, his reputation has been completely restored. In contrast, Edward Teller, who testified against Oppenheimer at his private hearing in 1954, faced rejection from many in the American scientific community for many years. In 1967, Oppenheimer was again nominated posthumously for the Nobel Prize for Physics for the third time. He had been nominated previously in 1946 and 1951, but he did not win on those occasions, nor in 1967. There has been much discussion over the years about why he was never awarded the Nobel Prize, considering his substantial achievements. However, there are evident reasons for this. First, Oppenheimer did not publish a lot, unlike someone such as Albert Einstein, who wrote over 300 scientific papers and several books in his lifetime. In comparison, Oppenheimer published only 5 academic papers after World War II. Additionally, even though he made contributions in many areas of physics, he did not reach a significant breakthrough in any specific field that would have earned him a Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prizes are typically given for specific scientific achievements rather than for a lifetime of work. His main contributions throughout his career lay in team efforts and managing groups of physicists and other scientists, which made him the perfect person to lead the Los Alamos laboratory during the war. And that was the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man who gave the world its most powerful weapon, and spent the rest of his life haunted by its consequences. His legacy remains one of history's greatest debates. Was he the brilliant mind who helped end World War II, or the scientist who unleashed a force beyond control? I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what topics you'd like to see next. Thank you for watching.